ever opened a time capsule, like packed with old photos and memories and stuff. Well, that's kind of what we're doing today, but instead of yearbooks, it's horror stories.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
Yeah, we're diving into Mark Leslie's One Hand Screaming.
A classic.
Right. But here's the thing. It was first published 20 years ago, and now there's this revised and expanded edition.
Oh, wow. So it's like a double dose of chills.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is seeing how the stories, but also like the author himself, have changed over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, I'm not into the same things that scared me as a kid,
Totally. So we're going to dig into all that, how our relationship with fear kind of morphs. But first, a little background on Mark Leslie and this whole One Hand Screaming thing for anyone who might not be familiar.
It's a pretty evocative title, that's for sure. Sticks with you.
Totally does. And in these new introductions to the stories, Leslie really reflects on his younger self, the writer he was back then.
Oh, I always find that fascinating. It's like they're having a conversation with a ghost, but the ghost is their own past.
Right. And you can see how he's shifted, like maybe away from pure horror and more into psychological thrillers.
Which makes sense, right? Like as we get older, the things that scare us change. The monsters under the bed become, well, like our actual lives and anxieties.
It's so true. And Leslie, he really taps into that. Like, remember how freaked out you were by, like, the dark when you were little?
Oh, tell me about it. I used to think there were monsters under my bed.
Right. But now it's probably more like, I don't know, deadlines. Or that weird noise your car's making.
Don't even get me started on that weird noise. See, Leslie gets it.
He totally gets it. It's like that saying, we fear what we don't understand, right? As we grow, those fears, they just become more internal, more about like the darkness inside us than spooky shadows.
Totally. And speaking of shadows and darkness, there's this one recurring motif in Leslie's work that's both creepy and kind of cool. Skulls.
Oh, yeah. Especially that story, The Exquisite Taste of a Book-Aged Skull.
Even the title. Right. So good.
It's like, what does it even mean for a skull to be book-aged? Like, is he saying knowledge can, like, seep into our very bones or something?
It's such a cool concept, though, right? This idea that the things we learn, the stories we consume, they literally shape who we are, like in a physical way. I love it.
And Leslie doesn't shy away from that, from, like, the physicality of it all. There's this scene where the main character, Herb, he's soaking a skull in bourbon.
Whoa. Okay. That's intense. What's he doing that for?
It's like he's trying to, I don't know, extract something from it. The essence of a life lived, maybe. It's both repulsive and fascinating at the same time.
Okay, yeah, I get it. Like, how far is too far in our search for knowledge, for understanding? Are we all just kind of picking at the bones of the past, trying to make sense of things?
And sometimes that search takes us to some dark places, which is where Leslie really thrives. He doesn't just do, like, your typical haunted house stuff.
No, he goes deeper, right? Like, into the really messed up stuff our brains can come up with.
Exactly. And he's not afraid to get a little weird with it, too.
Oh, yeah. Like that story, Twitter Tales. Who would have thought you could make Twitter scary?
It's like those bite-sized nightmares you scroll past at 2 a.m.,
And they just stick with you. He's good.
But it's not all like, weird skulls and Twitter. Leslie also writes about those, like, primal fears we get, the ones we carry with us from being kids.
Oh, totally. Like being afraid of the dark. Or is that just me?
No way. We've all been there. And Leslie, he takes that fear, that feeling of being watched when you're alone, and he just, like, cranks it up to 11.
Yeah, like in erratic cycles. That one messed me up.
Right. You're out in the woods, no cell service, and suddenly every snapping twig sounds like, I don't know, a monster or something.
Or a serial killer.
Ugh, don't even. See, that's what I love about Leslie stuff he gets, that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't like ghosts or vampires, but other people.
100%. The ones you least expect, right? Like in that story, what was it called? From Out of the Night?
Oh, yeah, that was wild.
It's about these kids camping, right? Telling scary stories.
And then things start to get a little too real. Like, did they really see that creature, or was it just their imaginations running wild?
It's that ambiguity that gets you. The not knowing. Reminds me of this one time, actually. I was camping with some friends, and we swore we heard something out in the woods.
No way. What happened?
Well, we never found out what it was. Probably just an animal or something, but still it freaked us out.
See, our brains can be our own worst enemies. But speaking of scary things that might or might not be real, there's Till Death Do Us Part. Talk about a different kind of fear.
Oh, man, that one was something else. Like, imagine breaking up with someone, but then they, like, literally never leave you alone, even in death.
It's hilarious and creepy at the same time, like those couples who just can't quit each other, even in the afterlife.
It makes you wonder about all the baggage we carry with us. in relationships and just in life, and what happens to it all when we're gone.
Deep thoughts, man. But that's what's so cool about diving into these stories a second time, now that there's this revised edition. It's like Leslie's not just retelling them, he's like engaging with them, adding new layers of meaning.
Right. It's like he's having a conversation with his past self, which, by the way, I'm dying to know, how did you even convince him to revisit these stories after all this time?
It's wild, right? Like going back to something you created years ago, seeing how it's held up, what's changed, what hasn't.
Totally. And sometimes those changes, they can be kind of scary too. Like you realize how much you've grown, how different your perspective is now.
For sure. And Leslie totally gets that. Like, he doesn't shy away from those changes. He embraces them. You can see it in the way he revisits these stories, especially the Shadow Men and Prospero's Ghost. They're like completely new experiences now.
It's like he's adding layers to them, right? Like those layers of meaning you were talking about.
Exactly. He's taking these stories that already mess with our heads and like making them even more complex, more nuanced.
A human, almost.
100%. It's like he's saying, yeah, we might be older now, maybe a little wiser, but those primal fears, those anxieties about the unknown, they never really go away. They just morph. Take the Shadow Men, for example. It's still about that feeling of being watched, hunted, especially in the wilderness.
Oh, God, that feeling. Like something's lurking just beyond the edge of the campfire light. So creepy.
Right. And the way Leslie describes it, the flickering shadows, the hushed tones, it's like he's tapping into something deep in our collective psyche.
Totally. Like we've all been in those situations, whether it's camping or just walking home alone at night. And suddenly, every sound, every shadow seems menacing.
And sometimes those shadows, they represent something real, something even scarier than we could imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Like in Prospero's Ghost.
Right.
Based on a real experience, isn't it?
Yeah. Leslie's talked about how he had this weird encounter in an old theater, something he couldn't explain.
See, that's what gets me, those stories that blur the line between reality and, like, the supernatural. You're left wondering, what if it's true? What if ghosts are real? Or, whatever else goes bump in the night.
Right, and maybe that's the point of it all, to make us question, to make us think about the things that scare us, the things we don't understand.
Exactly. And maybe even to find some kind of, strange beauty in those fears. Because, let's face it, there's something kind of fascinating about the dark side,
Totally. And I think that's what makes this deep dive, this exploration of Mark Leslie's work so compelling. It's not just about being scared, it's about confronting those fears, understanding them, and maybe even learning something about ourselves in the process.
Well said. It's like holding up a mirror to our own anxieties, to the things that keep us up at night.
And maybe, just maybe, by facing those fears head on, we can find a way to, if not conquer them, then at least coexist with them.
I think you just summed up the entire human experience in a nutshell. We're all just trying to make sense of the darkness, both inside and out.
And what better way to do that than through the power of story?